welcome to 20th Century Stories. Tonight we travel to Sarajevo, Bosnia in 1993. The city under siege, streets cut by shellfire, yet inside the hospital basement, the boilers hold their steady warmth. The wider world moves in headlines while here. The hours pass in small, careful acts before we begin. Settle in. Find a comfortable place. Let your breathing slow. This is your time to drift from the day, to ease into sleep at your own pace. If these quiet journeys help you rest, you can subscribe to 20th Century Stories. So another story is always waiting. Down in the plant room beneath the wards, the air holds a steady warmth. Pipes wrapped in gray lagging run like quiet rivers along the walls. 2 cage lamps cast a soft spill that stops just short of the coal bunker and the tool board where each wrench rests in its marked place. Steam lifts in thin threads from a safety vent and fades. Pressure dials sit inside brass rings with their needles quiet in the safe bands. A chalk slate leans beside the feed pump with neat lines for morning, noon, and night. Footprints lie over the floor and cold dust and settle again. Someone has written the names of the wards on a small board and tied a length of twine beside it. Radiology and maternity and surgery and the sterilization room listed in a calm order that does not change. The city above lives by careful measures. Streets watched, windows bandaged in tape. Water sent up the hill in trucks when mains go dry, generators rationed by hour. But in this room, the heat is held by habit, and the simple rhythm of iron and flame and water. The shovel waits with its blade against the bunker lip. Hands weigh the next throw by feel and memory. The sound of coal sliding is a low rustle that becomes part of the room's own breath. The fire door opens, and a warm glow lays itself across the plate in my sleeves. I lay a small fan to the left and another to the right. The door closes before any flare. The blue along the great edge holds like ink drawn thin. The boiler takes the feed and answers with a deeper tone that settles into the frame. A slow walk along the manifolds finds each valve by touch. Packings snug, flanges dry. The taped lens on the flashlight throws a narrow band that does not startle. The dark and does not spill beyond the floor. At the far run, a bleed screw waits above a quiet radiator line. A cloth over the palm and a gentle turn. A breath of air sighs out and gives way to warm water. Taps taken in order so the wards above keep their even heat. The logbook opens to a page that smells faintly of steam and graphite. Pressure written. In round figures, feed temperature noted. Coal drawn marked in steady strokes. Remarks kept short and clear so the next shift reads them without pause. On the bench, a roll of lagging waits beside twine and a tin of paste. A seam that loosened in the night is wrapped and tied. The pipe's warmth becomes even again. Condensation dries to a dull ring and then to nothing. A low hum reaches down from the generator on the floor above. Steady and spare. Lights in the corridors kept to lines of soft cones. Elevator idle. Stairwells guided by painted arrows and the memory of many climbs. Somewhere outside a distant thud rolls across the hill and goes away. Here it becomes only a small tremor in the hand on the wrench. The room resumes its own rhythm. A pump tick, a whisper in a trap, the little chatter of steam turning to quiet water. I feed the stoker with measured shovels and rest the handle against the plate. The iron edge smooth and familiar under the glove. The heat across the shins and the face gentle rather than sharp. A warmth that carries through cloth without haste. The schedule on the chalk slate asks for a higher band before rounds begin. Maternity and neonatal take priority at first light. Sterilization takes its hour after that. The kitchen long after noon when water supply allows. Each line a promise kept by small acts. At the wall, a narrow sight glass shows the level true. Between marks, a soft tap on the rim, and the meniscus answers with a tiny nod. Feed pump set one notch lower. The needle on the gauge rests where the band begins. Nothing drifts. Nothing presses. I tighten a packing nut by the width of a coin and wipe a bead. From the joint, the cloth turns a pale gray and goes back into the pocket. The wrench returns to the board with its brothers. The shape of their handles a row of quiet notes. Up the back stairs, a porter moves a cart of linen along a corridor that holds its warmth. The steam of clean sheets folds like breath in cool air and disappears. On another landing, a nurse checks. A strip thermometer taped to a radiator and nods to herself. I take 2 steps to the coal scale and mark the heap against a chalk line set last night. Ration is kept by ward schedule and by the weather that creeps under doors and along window. Frames. Today calls for thrift and steadiness rather than push. The flashlight with its taped lens makes a small moon on the ledger when I write. The letters slow and even, the time told without hurry. A note that the sterilizer coil took heat at the expected minute and returned it at the expected minute. The sort of sentence that calms the eye. A kettle sits on a small plate near the low return. Its quiet breath reminds me to pour and to share. 2 enamel mugs take a modest measure. One is left where the night watch will find it on their next circle through the room. The stoker takes another light fan. Door closed before flame. Lifts. The blue line along the grate stays fine as a drawn thread. The boiler answers with a sound that feels like a slow heartbeat through steel. I lay a palm against the lagged riser and count to 5 in the mind. Warmth steady, no hot spot, no cold shoulder. The pipe speaks a language of small differences that anyone can learn if they stand and listen. The city remains outside like a weather that will not be hurried. Convoys kept to their hours when they come. Roofs mended in lines that look like stitching. Chimneys giving thin columns of smoke that bend and straighten with the hill wind. Here the plant room keeps a pocket of summer for the floors above. Babies sleep in cribs under knitted caps. A surgeon's hands warm themselves at a radiator before dawn. A sink gives warm water to someone who has stood too long in the night. I bleed the last high trap and hear the line answer with a change of tone, a soft gurgle becoming a steady rush, then only heat moving where it is needed. I turn the screw home with 2 fingers and a care that leaves no scar on the brass. Coal drawn is entered. Coal remaining is estimated against the heap and the chalk. A note about the delivery hoped for in 2 days is set down as a line without worry. The room will stretch what it has. The fire asks for patience and receives it. The gauge glass clears beneath the rag again. The figures shine. The pump tick matches the breath. The shovel leans, the door stands closed. The heat holds. The wards above keep their still air and their quiet lamps. Work gathers itself into the next small act. A knot retied, a valve touched and left. A page turned. the kind of morning that moves by careful inches and leaves behind a corridor that feels like mercy. The morning settles into its slow shape. Footsteps in the corridor above move like soft metronomes. A trolley wheel gives a small song on a seam in the floor and then quiets. The plant room keeps its steady breath and waits for each small act. I close my gloves around the shovel handle. 2 light fans to the left and right. Door closed before any flare. The blue edge along the grate holds like a thin line of ink. The boiler answers with a low note that sits in the ribs and steadies them. The sight glass clears beneath the cloth. Water true between the marks. A gentle tap on the rim and the meniscus. Nods once. The feed pump is set a hair lower so the level rests without drift. The pressure needle keeps its calm place in the band. At the manifold I feel for heat through the lagging with the back of the glove. No hot spots, no thin chill. The seam I tied earlier is dry and even. The twine sits neat and the paste has set. The pipe speaks in a quiet language of steadiness. A porter comes down the back stair with a folded note tucked under the cuff. He leaves it on the bench and nods. The taped lens of my flashlight throws a small moon across the page. Maternity asks for a slightly warmer band before rounds. Radiology requests a gentle rise after noon to hold film baths. The schedule on. The slate adjusts by 2 lines that do not rush anyone. I turn the handwheel a quarter. The change is small and kind. The boiler breath deepens by a shade. The flow to the riser warms in even measure. Up above a nurse will rest her palm on a radiator and feel the answer arrive like a polite knock. The ash drawer slides with a low scrape. Gray like sifted flour slides into the scuttle. The door to the yard is open just a hand's width. Cold air steps in and is folded by the room's warmth. I tip the scuttle to a tin that sits under cover from the weather. The lid rests back. With a sound like a spoon on a cup, inside again, the door closes to its gentle latch. The coal bunker gives easily under the shovel. The iron edge smooth from years of small corrections and careful hands. I build a ready lip for the next hour, so nothing startles the rhythm. Along the far wall, a bleed screw waits for its morning turn. The cloth over the palm, the screw turned just so. A breath of air sighs out. Warm water follows. The line settles to a soft rush that fades and is steady quiet. The wrench goes back to the board in its marked outline. On the bench, the ledger opens to a page that smells of graphite and steam. Hour by hour, the figures fall into place. Feed temperature, pressure held, coal drawn and remaining by the chalk on the bunker. Remarks neat and brief so another pair of eyes can understand at once. A strip of felt is cut to shape and bound around a small elbow where lagging is thinned. Twine tied with a square knot that knows how to stay. The warmth becomes even. A bead that had thought about forming chooses not to. The pipe gives a deeper. Silence, the generator on the floor above holds its low hum. The corridor lights remain dim by rule. Daylight is a guest that takes its time. A cart with sterilization trays passes the plant room door and leaves a ribbon of clean heat in the air. The autoclaves have taken their hour and returned it. Somewhere outside, a long note travels over the hills and grows thin. The room answers. By doing nothing at all, the pump ticks in its steady time. The safety valve holds its peace. The plant has learned how to make calm regardless. I pour tea from the kettle that keeps a quiet breath near the low return. 2 enamel mugs, 1 left, for the porter when he circles back, the other warming my hands for a handful of breaths. The taste simple and good. The cup set down on a folded cloth so the plate does not glaze. A nurse leans in with a small knock that is more courtesy than need. Her voice is low. She leaves a note for afternoon dressings and the hour when the laundry will ask for water. The paper carries the faint smell of soap and wool. I pin it beside the slate where eyes will find it without looking hard. The stoker takes another light feed. Door closed. Blue edge neat. The boiler breath returns to its quiet line. Pressure, poised where the card prefers for a long day that refuses to hurry. I touch each valve with 2 fingers and count in the mind. The heat speaks through cloth and tells its truth without fuss. A little warmth saved here, a little given there. The sum held by habit rather than effort. From the stair, a cart arrives with a bundle of cloths and a tin of paste. A young orderly has stitched covers for 2 short runs of pipe. He sets them down with the care people use when they carry small animals. I thank him with a nod and a second mug of tea. The room gains 2 soft jackets and becomes quieter by exactly that much. In the ledger, I set a line that says only what matters. Covers fitted to risers at the foot of the east stair. Temperature even, no condensation. Signature given in a hand that neither hurries nor decorates. The coal scale gets its noon look. The chalk line meets the heap where I expected. Ration holds. Delivery remains a word for another day. The plant knows how to stretch hours out of black stone when asked politely. I walk the loop once more. Flashlight lens taped and kind. A thin band of light that finds only what is needed. Traps answer with small voices. A weep at a packing nut is met with a breath on the wrench and then silence. A squeak in the pump has no wish to stay once a drop of oil reaches the right place. Up above on a landing, someone laughs in a way that sounds like talking to a sleeping child. A radiator ticks, as fin and metal agree on the day. The sound drifts down the stair and settles on the pipes like dust that does not need to be swept. Afternoon gathers without deciding to be bright. The sky holds a pale color that belongs to cold. The plant room remains a pocket where summer has been reduced to numbers and valves and a bed of fire that asks only for measured attention. I make the small increase promised to radiology. Hand wheel turned the width of a coin. The change climbs the riser like a lift that has learned to move without noise. In the dark room baths, the line will hold steady and let images bloom at their own pace. The sterilizer coil receives a gentle feed for the last cycle. The gauge nods and settles. The trap breathes a little and goes quiet. The book receives a line with the hour set beside it. The handwriting ordinary and sure. The shovel rests where the reach is easy. The door stays closed. The blue along the grate tells me what I need to know. The pump tick becomes the only sound I notice. Breath and tick and the soft whisper of water returning through pipes that remember their work. Evening is not far. The porter will come again with a folded note and a thank you that belongs to the whole room and not to any person. The wards will keep their warm air and their quiet lamps. The laundry will finish and let its steam turn to nothing before the cart moves on. I stand still for a count of 10 and listen to the plant sing its small song. Iron and water and fire, twine and felt and paste, a kettle that remembers to breathe, a ledger that likes neat figures, a board of wrenches that never leave their outlines. Then I lift the shovel in both hands, 2 light fans to the corners. Door closed before any flare, blue holding like a thin thread. The day settling into night by slow degrees while the heat holds fast and kind for those who sleep above. Afternoon leans toward evening as the sky above the yard takes on a thin pewter shade. Corridor traffic softens to the hush that comes after rounds. The plant room keeps its tempered warmth, and the light in the cages turns the pipes into slow rivers of dull silver. A courier from the laundry leaves a cloth bundle of worn gaskets and a thank you folded inside. I sort the washers by size and keep the best for traps that chatter at odd hours. A slice from a bicycle inner tube becomes a seal for a stubborn union and sits there like it was meant to live its whole life in steam. The stoker feed is trimmed to a steady chew, coal metered by the feel in the shoulder, draft set by a hand's width on the damper so flames roll without licking high, ash door cracked just enough that the bed breathes and never sulks. A sigh moves through the return lines when a ward shuts. Its radiator bank for linen change. I give the bleed screw a cautious turn, and the line answers with a soft hush of air. Water follows in a warm thread, and the tone settles into the quiet hum I've come to trust. The electrician steps down 2 flights with a coil of wire and a grin stored for quiet rooms. He checks the generator panel by the stair and leaves a note that the evening switchover will be smooth. We share tea by the low return and talk only in words that do not hurry. On the bench, a strip of felt is brushed with paste and wrapped around a bare elbow where somebody once pulled lagging to pad a window frame. I tie the twine snug. The pipes. Temperature evens. Condensation dries to a chalk ring and fades back into the metal. From pediatrics, a nurse has written a neat request for a touch more warmth after dusk. I chalk the adjustment into the schedule where it will be met without fanfare. The line of figures is a small promise that the room will feel kind to small lungs and wool caps. A dentist's autoclave takes its cycle early thanks to a reshuffle. Upstairs, I open a valve by the width of a coin. The gauge nods and holds. The trap breathes for 3 heartbeats and falls still. The ledger receives a plain entry that would calm anyone skimming it by lamplight. Coal is scarce, but it is not rude. It listens when you speak in measured loads. I rake the bed with a slow arc and bring a dull clinker to the door. Tongs lift it into the scuttle, and a quiet thud marks its end. The grate thanks me with a cleaner glow that is more steady than bright. The flashlight with its taped lens writes a small ribbon across the wrench rack. Every handle sits inside its painted outline. The order pleases the mind and saves minutes that matter when pumps grow curious and ask for a touch of oil. Somewhere above the hill, a long sound moves across roofs and gutters. Here it becomes only a thin tremor in the soles, and then nothing. The plant room continues to sing in its own key. Valve breathe in trap whispers and the soft breath of the stoker chain. A porter lowers 2 buckets through the hatch with a rope burnished smooth by months. Warm water for a midwife who needs it now and not after a line forms. The buckets ride up into air that smells of soap and carbolic, and the rope returns coiled like a tamed snake on the hook. Evening call sheets arrive in a pocket folder rescued from an office that no longer has glass. I check the hour for sterilizers, the window for laundry, the brief lift requested by the neonatal room when the draft for the stairwell rises with the night. None of it asks for heroics. All of it asks for attention and patience. I walk the loop with the back of the glove, finding truth through lagging. Heat speaks in small differences. A riser that once ran hotter than its mate now matches because of a felt jacket and a knot that sits right. A union that wanted a voice has lost it under a thin washer cut from inner tube. The feed pump gives a quick chirp and then returns to its usual tick. A sign to check the strainers for grit, brought in by a delivery that was wetter than usual. I seat the screen again, wipe the rim. The pump resumes a rhythm that could be written on a staff. At the stoker door, I lay 2 light fans to the far corners. Door closed before any flare can lift into mischief. The bed spreads its warmth like a hand on a tired shoulder, not a showy heat, a reliable one. From upstairs, a folded card arrives with the word chapel written in a careful hand. They will hold a short service at dusk. I keep the corridor temperature steady along the path to that room. Not too warm to make people drowsy, not so cool that coats must stay on. A comfort that lets words sit where they should. The generator changes its tone by a hair as the building switches to evening pattern. Lights lift along the main hallway and dim along supply stairwells. The elevator stays asleep. The plant does not notice except to drink a touch more feed and keep the needle nestled in its white band. I cut a slender ribbon of cloth from a worn sheet and bind it under the handle of the coal scuttle. The grip no longer bites bare fingers after hours. Small mercies add up like coins in a jar. The day feels lighter by the end of the count. B. Slate above the bench gains 2 fresh lines. Deliveries hoped for tomorrow by noon. If not, stretch tonight's ration with a leaner feed from midnight to dawn. Wards warned by kind voices rather than notices on doors. I check the expansion tank tucked behind a low wall of brick. Its skin is warm and not hot. The level mark chalked months ago still tells the truth. No hammer in the lines. No tantrums. Waiting up high. Only water doing what it has done since someone bent the first pipe. In the corner, a crate of oddments holds treasure that would look like trash to a hurried eye. Rope ends, cork discs. Saved bolts with their threads still bold. A short length of copper that once bridged a leak on a day when nothing else would. The ledger keeps taking lines in a hand that does not pretend to be elegant. Time and pressure, and feed temperature, coal drawn and remaining. Remarks that mean the next person will not need to guess. Signatures that are never large and never late. I pause by the safety valves and listen for breath that should not be there. Nothing speaks out of turn. The room's hush is whole. A kettle lifts its lid with a tiny tremor and lays it down. Again, tea finds its way into 2 mugs the color of the inside of a shell. Dusk pulls softly through the corridor grills. Voices thin out. Doors quiet themselves. The plant holds to its line like a pencil drawn across a straight edge. The paper under that line is the night shift, and it will be long. I bleed the last radiator leg that always hides a bubble after sunset. It answers with a single sigh and then gives heat without argument. Upstairs, a chair will be moved 2 inches from a window, and nobody will remember it to be cold. The coal bunker shows its ribs, but not its bones. The chalk line set at noon still covers the heap by a good hand's breadth. I rake a ridge toward the lip for the small hours when thought can wander and the shovel should not need to. A nurse brings down a thermometer strip with a little smile because it read exactly as planned. We tape it to the ledger page beside the hour, and it becomes a bright scale inside a book of gray lines, proof that numbers became comfort. Night gathers and carries the chill like a silver bowl. I pull on a jacket that smells faintly of rope and paste. The damper takes a quarter. Turn. The draft shifts to a night cadence, meant to sip rather than gulp. The grate glows with an animal patience. Out in the city, generators cough and catch. The hills hold their own weather, made of wind and rumor. The hospital sits cupped in its routines. Nothing is loud. Everything is firm. Heat walks the risers and steps into rooms where people sleep with their hands open. I take one more loop with the taped lens, throwing a thin bar that finds only what we need to find. Packings are snug. Traps, courteous. Hunks content. A leak that dreamed of starting chooses not to when the wrench breathes in the right direction. Then I note the hour in the ledger and stack 2 clean claws on the bench for the person who comes after me. The shovel rests where a sleepy reach. We'll find it. The kettle breathes in a small way that says it will be ready when called. The plant room keeps its warm weather under concrete and dust and quiet faith, and the wards above carry that weather in bodies and cups and the soft sound of linen being turned. Night thickens along the stairwells. The cages throw small islands of light on the pipe skins. The plant room settles into a slower breath that matches the hour. Each sound spaced with care so the ear can rest. I draw the ash door a finger's width. Rake the bed in gentle arcs. Clinker loosens and slides with a muted weight. The grate clears without complaint. The door closes before the flames think to lift. A blue seam holds along the bars like a fine thread. The feed pump ticks in a thin, even line. I lean to the gauge glass and wipe a clear oval. Water stands true between its marks. A soft tap on the rim and the meniscus nods. The injector takes. A small run and falls still. The needle rests where the band begins. Nothing presses. Nothing sags. In the far corner, the blow-down cock waits. I open it the width of a coin. Warm water and a breath of steam carry grit into the trench. The line brightens. The cock closes with a clean seat. The boiler thanks me by keeping its tone level and quiet. A felt pad is cut to the size of a palm and tied under a strap where a hanger has fretted the lagging. Twine snug. Paste smoothed with a thumb. The hot spot softens. The pipe speaks in lower notes. The room grows easier by a shade. The porter leaves a folded slip under a wrench. Neonatal resting. Radiology cooled enough for the last tray. Maternity. Asking for steadiness rather than rise. I make 2 marks on the slate that look like the hands of a clock held open. The generator upstairs carries a low hum like distant bees. A single lamp in the corridor outside the plant door is shaded with paper, so its light does not leak where it is not wanted. Steps pass now and then. A shoe taps once on the stair and is gone. I oil the stoker chain with 3 small touches. 1 to the roller, 1 to the pin, 1 to the little place that always forgets. The chew becomes smooth. The sound falls into the same cadence as breath. A comfort shared between iron and chest, a coil for the sterilizer, asks for a final warm hand. The valve opens a finger's width. The gauge nods and holds. The trap answers with 3 quick notes and quiets. The ledger receives a neat line with an hour that will make sense to anyone who turns the page in the morning. Coal waits in the bunker like a dark hill that gives what it has without drama. I pull a small ridge to the lip for the next reach. The shovel leans against the plate, the handle wrapped with cloth so the palm never fights it. A lesson learned and kept. Outside the yard, the sky wears no color, only a thin shine on snow packed into wheel ruts. A gust drops a handful of grit against the door and then forgets us. The plant keeps its weather. A small summer sealed under concrete for those who sleep. I walk the loop with a taped lens making a narrow bar. Packings touched and left. Unions that once wept now dry and content. Traps breathing a little and then calm. The small voices of a system that wants to be good if someone listens. On the bench, a sachet of softener salt sits like a promise. I feed a measured scoop into the feed. Tank, the float murmurs. The splash becomes a lullaby. Scale will take longer to think about forming. The glass will stay clearer. The heat will travel easier to the work it must do. The cup finds my hands. Enamel warm enough to speak through the bones. I sip and set it upon a folded cloth. Steam writes. A thin script that means nothing but comfort. The kettle remembers to breathe. The plate stays clean because cloth remembers its job. The expansion tank behind the low brick wall is checked by palm and by eye. Level steady at the chalk mark made. Months ago, no hammer in the lines, no chatter hiding in elbows. The network as mild as it can be. A nurse steps in with a card the size of a hand. Night dressings moved a half hour. Keep the corridor on a gently rising line. I chalk a single stroke, a promise made without speech. The valve wheel turns the width of a fingernail. The riser carries the message to where it must arrive. Somewhere high in the building, a cartwheel sings briefly on a gap in the floor. I hear it through steel and water as a thin silver note. The room answers by doing nothing. Steadiness is an answer that requires no words. The hour bends toward midnight. I ease the damper to a night setting that sips rather than drinks. 2 light fans to the far corners. Door closed before any flare. The bed glows like a banked hearth. Heat saved for the long hours when even numbers get drowsy. The ledger takes another line. Pressure and feed in quiet figures. Coal drawn in measured heaps. Remarks pared to bone so the next shift can see the road at a glance. A name signed small. The kind of mark that does not ask for attention. I stand by the risers and count in. The mine 5 for 1, 5 for its twin, warmth even. Seems untroubled, twine neat as stitching. The pipes holding their temper like good people in a long winter. The kettle gives a tap under its lid. I pour a thumb of hot water over the spoon to wake the leaves that cling. A second mug sits for whoever turns up with news from a corridor. Small provisions make long nights shorter. A truth as old as bricks. At the ash trench, a tin lid opens and closes with the politeness of a book set down. The scuttle is emptied, with slow movements so dust keeps its place. A breath of cold comes through the door and bends before the room's low summer. The latch answers with a soft click. Peace returns. I listen for a while. Just listen. The plant speaks in ticks and hushes, in tiny sighs from traps, and the longer vowel of a pump that knows its pace. All of it laid in rows like beds in a ward. All of it asking for nothing more than presence and time. Midnight arrives without a clock, only by the way the building relaxes another degree, by the way the ledger line sits a shade straighter, by the way the shovel looks content to lean. I breathe with the engine. The room breathes with me. The wards above keep their heat like a promise kept. Then the next small act is ready. A valve turned the width of a coin, a strap pulled snug, a note pinned where a tired hand will see it. The narrative of warmth moving forward by quiet inches. The night unspooling at a pace that lets sleep take those who can, and rest sit down beside those who cannot. The hour after midnight carries a deeper hush. Stairwells breathe in long, slow drafts. The cages cast soft halos on pipe skins and wrench handles. The plant room holds its pocket of summer like a lantern cupped in both hands. I ease the damper to a night sip. Coal-fed and thin fans to the far corners. The door closed before any flare thinks to rise. The bed glows like banked embers. A blue seam along the bars, steady as a thread pulled tight. The gauge glass is cleared with a fold of cloth. Water stands between its marks. A gentle tap and the meniscus gives a small nod. The injector sings a short silver line and goes quiet. The needle rests where the band begins. The pump tick keeps time like a watch in another room. A soft tremor runs the length of the return line. Not trouble. Only a ward closing 2 valves for bedding change. I lift the bleed screw a touch. Air breathes out. Warm water follows. The tone settles into velvet and remains. At the bench, a strip of canvas is cut for a hinge cover, where heat had been stealing by drafts. Paste brushed thin, canvas pressed and tied. The leak becomes a memory. The corridor above will feel less like a door left ajar. The porter leaves a loop of twine and a smile that reads his thanks. He has hung hot water on a hook outside neonatal. The rope comes back with a good weight of service done. I coil it and hang it on its nail, so the next hand finds no knot to fight. On the slate I draw 2 careful strokes for the early hours. Radiology kept at a plateau. Maternity lifted by a hair before rounds. Every change small enough to pass unnoticed and yet felt in shoulders and breath. The stoker chain receives 3 drops of oil placed where habit remembers. Roller, pin, little turning place that always asks last. The chew becomes silk. The sound melts into the room's low chord. A whisper from a trap tells me a felt jacket would be kindness. I cut a half moon from saved wool, bind it under twine, smooth paste with the thumb. The elbow stops knocking for attention. Heat chooses the straight path and wastes nothing. Coal ration is checked by the chalk that waited all day to be asped. The heap still above the line by a steady hand's breadth. I pull a ridge to the lip for the hour when thought drifts and muscle memory should carry the work without searching. Wind moves outside with a dry hush along the yard wall. The door takes a breath and gives it back. Sand in the sill speaks a grain at a time. The plant's weather does not change. Small summer stays seated. I open the blow-down cock the width of a coin. Warm water and a little steam bear out grit. The seat returns home clean. The boiler thanks me with a tone like a calm chest after a cough has passed. A nurse steps in. with a card the size of a palm. Dressings moved by a modest span. Corridor warmth kept even for bare forearms. I turn the wheel no more than a fingernail. The riser feels the message and carries it to where hands will work with comfort. The generator upstairs trims its voice by a shade. Batteries are taking their breath. Lights in storerooms sleep. The main corridor glows like river water under. Ice our meters make no fuss. The band stays true. I pour tea from the kettle that keeps a small cloud to itself. One mug left on the bench for whoever circles next. One held until Bones answer that the heat has arrived. Cup set on the folded cloth so the plate does not glaze. A weep begins at a union no wider than a fingernail, not a leak. Only a thought of one. The wrench speaks softly. The threads seat. A bead that wished to be born decides to remain imagined. The rag returns clean to its pocket. I walk the loop with the taped lens open to a narrow stripe. Packing snug, flanges dry. Traps courteous. The little elbow at the east wall now quieter, because wool holds it like a hand on a shoulder. From upstairs a faint clatter becomes a whisper in iron. A cart finds a seam and moves on. The lines do not mind. They have learned the voices of the building the way family learns each other's step on a stair. The ledger takes a fresh line and a hand that never hurries. Pressure held. Feed temperature good. Coal drawn small and regular. Remarks plain as bread, a name signed with letters that sit low and modest. I rest the shovel so its reach will be easy. Handle wrapped in cloth that does not bite. The iron edge smooth from years of correction. The tool knows the arm that uses it and asks for nothing louder than rhythm. Toward the small hours the plant room grows gentler still. Heat becomes a sound more than a feeling. The pipes hum a vowel in the key of sleep. Shadows settle in the corners like folded coats. I test the safety valve with a feathered touch. No quarrel, no surprise. The spring holds its promise. Steam remains where it serves. The room returns to its hush as if nothing had been asked. A corner of lagging is mended with linen tape saved from an old sheet. Paste brushed thin, wrap drawn smooth. Twine knotted square. The pipe's skin loses its rough patch, and the draft along the wall forgets to pry. Coal is given in 2 light fans to the far corners, door closed before any flame rises proud. Blue edge fine and even, the bed answering like a quiet animal. Curling back to warmth, I stop by the expansion tank behind the low brick wall, palm to metal, count to 5 with breath. Level at the chalk line made in another season. No hammer in the run. No chatter waiting to surprise the morning crew. The yard beyond the door holds a pale shine like old tin. Icicles lengthen along a gutter with the patience of monks. Somewhere beyond the hill a long sound rolls and becomes thinner than thread. Here it cannot land. The plant keeps its weather. I fold 2 fresh claws and leave them where cold hands will be grateful. Sharpen the pencil to a calm point. Sweep with the gentlest pass so dust does not rise. The room likes these small courtesies and pays back by needing less. A final check of the sterilizer coil for the night shift nurse who trusts this room more than luck. The valve opens a whisper. Gage nods. Trap speaks 3 syllables and rests. A line in the book holds the hour and makes a small island where memory can sit. I breathe with the engine. Ribs answer the slow rhythm. Shoulders loosen. The ledger waits for another plane line. The shovel waits for another measured lift. The hospital sleeps in rooms that feel quietly kind. Then the next act presents itself without speech. A wheel, turned the width of a coin. A strap pulled snug where felt has been patient. A note pinned where a tired eye will find it. The plant room holding summer under concrete so that elsewhere someone can sleep, and elsewhere someone can work with warm hands, and the story can move forward by careful inches into the pale hour. Before dawn, the hour tilts toward the first hint of pale. Not light yet, only a thinning of night along the yard wall. The plant room hangs low while the rest of the building drifts between breaths. I take the flue brush from the rack and crack the soot door. A slow draw of gray comes away like old velvet. 2 measured passes cleared the throat. The stack thermometer climbs a finger's width and steadies. The flame answers with an easier roll that saves coal without asking for attention. On the bench, a parcel of thin felt offcuts and 2 lengths of blanket arrive from stores. I jacket the bare elbow above the return, bind with twine, and lay a strip of blanket over the main riser where a draft prowls. The cold that crept there lifts, and the pipe gives back a deeper quiet. From a crate that held supplies, I prize 3 short pallet slats, nails pulled and kept. The wood split into tidy billets that join the starter box, a courtesy to the next shift when the coal wants company to catch at 4 in the morning. The level glass shows true. I slide the blow-down jar beneath the cock and give it a thin turn. A warm ribbon carries grit, then clears. Seat home, jar capped. The feed valve opened just enough to place the line between marks again. The band on the gauge is met and held. Radiology sent a note for cooler baths to Ward. Dawn, I trimmed the wheel by the width of a fingernail. Repeat the stroke on the paired line so the fall is even across the wing. Upstairs, the trays will keep their temper, and the images will bloom without hurry. A basket of hot water bricks waits by the low return. I wrap them in towels and hand them off at the door to a porter bound for the nursery. The warmth goes up, under wool caps and into small hands that close and relax. At the sterilizer rack, a braided hose shows a bulge the size of a thumb. I cut a leather collar from an old strap, seat it under a clamp, and lay a turn of waxed twine. The swelling eases. The drip that would have come does not. The trap speaks once and settles. A whisper of radio passes the open stair, like moth wings. News in another room, kept low. Convoy talk, too many verbs, not enough times. Here it becomes. Only a reminder to write the hour plain in the ledger. Pressure kept, feed heat steady. Coal drawn lean. Remark that flue cleared and riser wrapped. The stoker takes 2 shallow fans scattered close, not far. Enough to lift the bed without sending sparks. Damper eased to a night sip. Stack pulls smooth. The blue behind the bar is kept to a line. No thicker than a thread. I kneel at the furthest bleed and turn the key a quarter. Air hisses soft, becomes a warm bead, then a ribbon, then nothing. The riser above answers with a tone like a low vowel. A nurse on the landing feels the panel, change under her palm, and nods to nobody in particular. A tin of soft soap sits by the sink. I warm a rag and clean the sight glass clamps and the wheel spokes where coal dust collects. The metal answers with a dull shine. The hand wheel turns kinder after soap and cloth have spoken. From the laundry a list arrives on thin paper. Sheets will dry on racks rather than lines, so steam use can fall for an hour. I log the window and lower the valve that feeds their coil. The change travels like quiet through timber. The room answers by needing less. I lift the condenser cap on the feed tank and seat a coil of copper salvaged from a broken warmer. Warm return water now gives a little of itself to the cold feed. The needle drifts a shade higher for the same coal. Small thrift becomes part of the day as if it had always been there. A child's drawing rides the porter's cart when it passes the door. A square with windows, a red cross taller than the roof, a stripe of yellow above it that means sun. The paper is taped to a cupboard in the corridor where people will see it without meaning to. I take the wrench with the scar on its jaw and snug the union that has dreamed about weeping since snowfall began. The dream fades. The rag I hold stays. Clean, the wrench returns to its outline on the board. Toward 4, the building leans awake. Footsteps test the stairs. A tray rolls and pauses. A voice says thank you to a door frame. The plant room shifts its breathing, a little wider to match. Maternity asks for a rise before checks. I open the wheel a coin's width. Mirror the stroke on its twin. The column warms, not quickly, only surely. The rise is felt as a change in shoulders rather than in air. The coal heap shows the chalk by 2 fingers' depth. Still good. I draw a ridge forward so the next hour needs no searching in the dark. The cloth on the shovel handle sits right, and the iron edge feels like memory in the hand. A nurse brings down glass syringes in a tray for a last dry before use. I set the coil to give their cabinet a brief, even heat. The gauge nods like someone listening and agreeing. A single line goes to the ledger with the minute written slow, so it is legible in any light. By 5, the yard takes a faint color that is not quite morning. Gutters hold glass teeth. The chimney sends a thin column that folds and straightens. The hospital gathers itself without noise. I walk the loop one more time. The wool collars I tied earlier sit easy. Paste has set and forgotten to be seen. The pump paw keeps its small law. The traps give respectful answers when asked and keep quiet when not. 2 buckets ride up the hatch on the porter's rope. Water for a room where daybreak is a shift rather than a light. I coil the rope smooth so it will run again without fight. The knot sits like a good sentence halfway down. Tea moves from kettle to enamel. I leave 1 mug on the bench and carry 1 to the door. Cool air stands there and decides not to come in. The mug warms the gloves and the wrists and asks for nothing in return. The ledger takes its next calm line. Flue-brushed. Feed pre-warmed by coil. Radiology cooled. Maternity raised toward 6. Coal ration holding. Remarks that the corridor, too. The chapel will not need help until dusk. Signature small, steady, plain. A distant clatter rides the hill and becomes a whisper along the pipes. A convoy, perhaps, or an empty street finding its voice. The plant room keeps its summer regardless. The story of heat continues in valves and fibers and measured shovels. I set the damper to the day's first breathe rather than sip. Lay 3 light fans close across the front. Doors shut on a gentle hand. The flame grows round instead of tall. The needle enters the band and stays. Above, a door opens to a ward that smells of soap and wool. Someone says good morning because the radiator is warm before the window shows its color. The room up there will not know about felt and twine and copper and soot. It will only know comfort, and that is the right shape for the knowledge to take. The plant room waits for the next card slipped under the wrench or the next voice at the door. Nothing urgent. Everything necessary. A boiler holding its temper, a building keeping faith. The day beginning in careful inches that make a road all there. Owned by 6, the stairwell finds a pale light that is more suggestion than sun. Wards wake in low voices and cloth footsteps. The plant room loosens its shoulders and widens its breath to meet the day. I check the belt on the feed pump. Canvas stitched last month with waxed thread still true. A finger's press finds the right give. 2 nuts take a quarter turn, and the hum settles into a rounder note. The sight glass is wiped to a clear oval. Water holds between marks. A light tap on the rim and the meniscus gives a polite nod. Injector silent and ready. Pressure needle resting where the band begins. The room's pulse even and kind. Coal is drawn with a flatter throw now that people are moving above. 3 short fans kept close to the door. Damper eased to a day breath rather than a night sip. Flame rolling low and round. The grate bright without flare, a porter brings a dented pail of rainwater saved from yesterday. I feed. A measured ladle to the softener so the resin keeps its manners. The float answers with a small lift. The feed takes the hint and will travel more gently through the coils. In radiology, a tray of film baths wants a cool shoulder. I trim the wheel the width of a fingernail. Copy the stroke to its partner. The fall spreads as evenly as a sheet. Laid flat, shadows will form where they should without hurry. The nursery sends down 2 bricks, still warm from the cabinet. Their towels damp with good work done. I set them by the low return to dry. It feels right to let the room accept what it gave and make it ready again. At the sterilizer rack, a little sight glass is clouded. I rinse it with hot feed and a drop of soft soap. The window clears, the level line shows honest. The trap murmurs once and rests. A plain entry goes into the book with the minute written slow. On the bench, I cut a gasket from a strip of rubber saved from a prom tire. The union that has dreamed of weeping accepts the ring and forgets its thoughts. The wrench seats the threads. With a breath and a pause, rag returns to the pocket as clean as it left. The electrician leans in with a spool the color of river clay. He resets a breaker that likes to wander. We trade a length of twine for his spare fuses in a quiet market that has no coins. Tea travels both ways. The kettle keeps its small promise. I take the flue brush once more for a light pass. Soot falls like fine ash and disappears into the pan. The stacked thermometer rises a finger's width and steadies. The fire thanks us by asking a little less from the bunker. A nurse pins a card near the slate. Dressings at 9 require steady warmth in the corridor and a temperate sink. I chalk a line that looks like a path on a small map. The wheel turns a coin's width. The riser carries the message without spilling a word. The yard picks up the tiniest color. Roofs inhale. Icicles look thinner by a hair. A truck rolls somewhere far, and the sound arrives as a faint thrum that the pipes ignore. The plant keeps. Its weather. Small summer held below ground for those who need it. I test a radiator key I filed smooth last winter. It finds the bleed without nicking brass. Air breathes out in a soft ribbon. Warm water follows. Upstairs, a strip thermometer will shift by a band. and someone will call it good in a voice that sounds rested. The ledger receives lines that are all verbs and trust. Feet pre-warmed by a salvaged coil, belt trued, flue brushed light. Radiology, cooled by a hair, nursery supplied. Coal ration holding steady. Remarks plain as bread. Signature small and sure. I run a palm along the felt jackets tied yesterday. They sit like quiet coats, paste set. Twine snug. The draft that prowled at the wall, now gone to find mischief elsewhere. The pipe gives back a deeper stillness that feels like a well with a lid. From laundry, a runner brings a stack of wire racks for drying without steam. I trade him a roll of linen tape and a handful of saved bolts. He leaves smiling and lighter. The plant room has a way of turning scraps into favors and favors into heat. I open the blow-down jar and give the cock a thin turn. Warm ribbon out. Grit carried, seat shut clean. Feed eased to replace the line between marks. The needle returns to its quiet shelf. The pump tick falls back into the room's low cord. The shovel handle sits right in the hand. Cloth binding smooth. Edge sliding under coal with the grace of a tool that knows its owner. Two short fans to the far corners. Door closed before any flare. Blue seam held like a thread pulled straight. Above a corridor door sighs on its hinges. And a voice says good morning in a tone that sounds like the end of a long winter. The plant answers with nothing showy. Only steadiness spread through iron and water, and felt and flame rounds begin. Carts whisper past the grate on the landing. Cups clink once in quiet. I lift the wheel for maternity by the width of a coin. Write the hour on the slate. Mirror the stroke on the paired line so both wings feel the same kindness. A spare thermometer is checked in a basin mixed warm and cool by the tip of a finger. The column climbs and waits at the figure the card expects. I mark a tick beside its number and hang it where hands can trust it. The coal heap shows the chalk at a depth that will see us into afternoon without thrift becoming scold. A ridge is drawn toward the lip for the shoulder's sake. The scuttle gets a wrap of cloth so an apprentice hand will not learn pain before skill. Tea moves again, enamel warmed. A cup left for whoever steps through the door with a question written on a folded card. Small provisions let the day pass in round edges rather than corners. The city outside holds to its quiet. Windows mended with tape catch the first light and give it back in soft pieces. Rooftops breathe. The long road on the hill keeps its distance. Our meters do not care. The band is met, the glass is true. The book keeps its calm script. I listen once more to the tracks along the east wall. A faint chatter from one elbow asks for a felt ring. I cut a circle from blanket, bind it with linen tape, smooth the paste with a thumb. The sound goes from speech to sleep. Heat prefers the straight path again. A last look at the flanges and the packings and the valve stems says the morning is sound. The room's posture is good. No corner waits to be noticed. The plant stands like a person who has learned to breathe. From the belly, then I tip the shovel in a small bow to the fire and lean it where a tired hand will find it without search. The ledger lies open to the next line. The corridor above holds a soft warmth that reaches ahead of footsteps. The day stretches forward in patient inches, and the work remains to be tended with the same calm hands. A wind moves along the hills, like a slow hand. The city keeps its hush beneath curfew and checkpoints. Convoys wait for a narrow window at the airport road. In the wards, the talk is gentle and close to the work, and down here the plant room holds its steady breath, so those upstairs can keep theirs. I check the small header where returns from surgery meet the main. A cooler wash tells me they are between cases. I trim the wheel a finger's width and let the corridor keep a calm shoulder for the team when they scrub back in. The stainless cabinets will not fog. Sleeves will dry without haste. A strip of cork is pressed under a latch that rattles when the stairwell drafts. The sound vanishes and the heat keeps to its lane. The ledger takes a line that says only latch seated in corridor tone, improved. A sentence that makes sense in the tired. Hour between shifts, someone leaves a folded bulletin on the bench. Power will stagger by district through the afternoon. Hospital exempt if fuel holds. Water trucks at the lower square after midday. I chalk the likely moments beside the slate, so we stretch coal when the generators lift and spend it when the street goes dark again. The flue gate is eased, and the stack draws like a well that remembers rain. Soot brushed in 2 soft passes. The thermometer climbs a hair and rests. The bed can eat less and give the same warmth. Thrift as quiet as a nod. I listen at the trap that serves the laundry wing. 1 quick syllable and silence. Towels will dry on racks to save steam when the grid falters. Upstairs they have learned the same language as the pipes. Small shifts that add to comfort without any bright announcement. A porter lowers a crate through the hatch. Inside are hot bricks wrapped in towels and 3 jars of broth from a kitchen that keeps its flame in a corner. I trade felt scraps and twine and a spare key for a radiator that sulks on their floor. The city works like this now. Exchanges of small steadiness that become warmth. Snow powder drifts under the yard door when someone steps through with a broom. I roll a length of blanket and wedge it along the sill. The draft oozes heart. The boiler thanks me with a lower sigh. The kettle finds a faster boil and shares it out. At the return header, the gauge reads kinder than yesterday. A coil I seated. At dawn gives back its promise. The needle sits where a person can love it. I mark the hour. WRITE, a short note that a salvaged copper loop now pre-warms the feed. A little victory tucked among the quiet lines from a corridor above. The lift that never runs makes a hollow sound as a gurney passes its doors. People move by stare and habit. The hospital keeps to the shapes that work and lets the others sleep. The plant matches that mood. Fewer jerks, more even breath. I test the low water alarm with a touch like lifting thread. Bell steady, switch clean. I set it back and feel the room accept the check the way a patient accepts a blanket. Nothing flashy. Only assurance. A nurse brings a small list written in pencil. Afternoon dressings. A line for oncology to keep air mild rather than warm. A corridor table for tea at a certain hour when visitors are allowed by exception. I map the list to valves and risers. When the city changes tempo, we will not need. The hills send back a long sound that turns thin before it reaches us. A tram line that once rang like a bright string lies quiet under snow. In the basement, the meter holds to its band. The glass stays clear. The room answers history with a steady hand and a clean rag. I dress the fire differently now that day has taken hold, not fans to the corners. A shallow blanket drawn close to the door. The flame goes round rather than tall. The needle moves into the safe arc and stays. The pump tick fades until it feels like part of breath. 2 buckets ride the rope to wards where morning has brought small hunger. The porter's knot comes back smooth and easy. We talk without speaking about the window when a convoy may pass. If it does, coal will arrive by late light. If not, the schedule will tighten and the night will ask for more art and less fuel. I take the flue brush once more for 3 slow strokes. Not because numbers are wrong, but because the sky has turned. Still, and the draw needs a kind hand. Ash falls like dry snow. The stove mouth breathes easier. Soot turns from appetite into memory. A faint call drifts from a high street where a shop opens for 1 quiet hour. Bread if the queue is short. Tea if the stove keeps its courage. Down here, the ledger treats time the same way the bell treats. Air, with courtesy and measure. I write the next line for pressure and feed and coal and remarks. Signature small, sure, unhurried. The corridor outside carries the first smell of soap and wool drying after rounds. Radiators give a patient tick as metal and water agree. I walk the loop once more, palm to felt, ear to traps, wrench to a nut that asks only for the width of a coin. The system answers like a choir of low notes, every voice in place along the hills the day widens. Checkpoints and blue helmets and winter coats in quiet files. A narrow freedom of movement announced, and then retracted, and then granted again. The hospital keeps its own calendar of heat and light. No speeches, only valves and hands. I bank the bed for the noon hour. A ridge pulled near, a sip of damper. A glance at the header for the wing that cools most quickly when doors are busy. A chalk mark where the afternoon will ask for a lift. The plant room holds summer for those who climb the stairs, and in doing so it adds a small, steady answer to the wider winter that waits outside. Midday leans close, though the sky stays the color of tin. The stairwell carries slow voices and the faint ring of enamel on enamel. In the plant room, the air holds a gentle weight that makes the shoulders loosen and the breath fall into even steps. I mark the slate for the noon window. Maternity helped. In a quiet rise, radiology eased back after trays are cleared. Laundry shifted to racks without steam until the grid breathes. The lines look like a small map anyone could follow without asking. The calorifier for hot water lifts a degree with the smallest turn. I lay a hand to the recirculation line and feel the round warmth moving at the right pace. The pump casing hums a steady valve. The anti-scald mixer is trimmed a hair, so basins upstairs greet hands kindly rather than quick. From triage a folded slip says keep corridor temperate for transfers. I ease the valve that serves the long run beneath the ramp. Felt jackets I tied last week sit close to the pipe skin and make the draft forget its old habits. The return gauge answers with a rise no larger than a coin. I lift the strainer cap on the condensate return. A shallow tray receives what grit the week has brought. Mesh rinsed, seat wiped, threads greased with a thumb of paste saved in a paper twist. Cap home with a polite snug. The line goes quiet in the way that means less arguing and more work. At the fire door, the rope gasket has frayed where the hinge pin worries it. I braid a fresh length from stove rope saved in a tin. Press it square with a butter knife. The door closes against its new softness. and the flame settles to a calmer shape that eats less and gives the same. The belt on the small circulator looks right from a distance. Up close it winks a shallow nick. I dress the edge with sandpaper. Wrapped round a stick, the nick becomes a memory. The belt turns true, and the bearing tells me so with a lower note. A rusted sight glass clamp refuses manners for 2 breaths. Warm rag, patient pressure. It remembers its promise and sets. Mica shines like a thin leaf of ice. Water line true between marks. A tap on the rim, and the meniscus nods exactly once. I break a pallet slat into billets and feed 3 to the starter. Box, not now. Later, the hour when thought drifts will thank the hands that prepared its path. Thrift is a slow river that turns the mill by inches. A bulletin comes down in a nurse's pocket. Curfew shifted by an hour. Corridor lights to remain shaded after dusk. Water trucks at lower square if the road holds. Deliveries uncertain at the ridge. I chalk 2 strokes beside the slate, and under them write simple words for the night crew. Stretch if trucks miss. Lift if trucks make it. Outside, the city holds still in a way only besieged places learn. Checkpoints folded into winter coats, radios kept low, roofs patched with tin and prayer. Up here no trams sing. Down here the meter keeps to its white band. The plant answers the wide noise with a kind of quiet that spreads. I open the blowdown into the jar. Warm ribbon out. Grit with it. Seat home. Feed eased, so the line returns to its middle. The stack thermometer climbs a finger's width after a light pass with the flue brush. The draw becomes silk. Coal can be spoken to in smaller sentences. The traps along the east run speak in different dialects. A thermostatic one clicks and sleeps. A float and lever sighs and swallows. A mischief maker at the far elbow rattles until I wrap it with a band of blanket and tie it under linen tape. The speech softens. The corridor above will hear fewer arguments in the floorboards. A porter arrives with a narrow tin of inhibitor, carried like bread. I measure a cup into the feed and stir with a wooden slat. Scale will think twice before taking a house on any surface that carries heat. The glass will stay clearer. The rooms will warm with less persuasion. In pediatrics, a window has found a draft that spoils naps. I cut a strip of felt and slip it beneath the sill where a hinge is no longer proud. The note that returns says only better now. A whole paragraph. Inside 2 words, the stoker is fed in a new pattern for the noon hour. Not corners, a soft blanket across the door. Damper eased to a breath made for daytime. The flame rounds rather than climbs. The needle enters its easy arc and holds. The grate answers with a glow that looks like trust. I chalk the coal line again against the bunker face. Ration holds despite. A long morning. A ridge is drawn toward the lip. The scuttle's cloth binding is fresh and kind to the hand. A tool that does not bite helps a shift last longer than it otherwise might. From the corridor, a stretcher moves like a slow river. The building takes a longer breath. The ramp under triage keeps its mild shoulder because the small wheel I turned earlier now keeps its promise. A nurse passes the plant door and taps the frame with 2 fingers in a greeting that means continue. I seat a short coil of copper under the feed lid where returning warmth can share its temper. The delta closes by a thumb's breadth. The gauge answers with a shade more kindness. Small salvaged loops begin to feel like a new language the plant speaks fluently. Over the hill, the sound of something heavy rolls and thins. Blue helmets will decide our call later, or perhaps not. Either way, the book waits for a neat line, not a hope. So I write what is true. Pressure kept, return good. Mixer trimmed, traps wrapped. Fuel holding until evening with present feed. Remarks spare and legible. The kettle sets a small cloud under the pipe that carries neonatal back to the main. 2 enamel cups, one left on the bench for whoever comes with news. One carried to the door where cool air stands and watches, and then declines to enter. I take the draft gauge reading with the kind of care that costs nothing. Needle steady at the figure that lets flames stay round. The flute gate moved a finger at dawn was the right choice. I mark it in the margin of the slate, so a tired eye will not have to remember. In the corner, the old brown tire that gave us gaskets is mostly gone. Pieces of old lives keep the new day warm. Scraps turn to seals, blanket to jackets, copper to loops. A grammar of salvage that writes comfort line by line. Afternoon draws near without changing color. The stairwell air tastes faintly of soap and wool. I lift the wheel for dressings by the width of a coin. Mirror the stroke on the paired line so the wing over the courtyard does not feel forgotten. Upstairs hands will rinse and tie and wrap, without thinking about the temperature at their wrists. The laundry runner returns a note that says no grid until late. Racks only. I lower their coil to idle, and the header shows it right away. The return runs cooler but smoother. The sigh that once haunted the elbow is gone. At the far wall, a manometer siphon needs love. I crack the petcock and let it breathe. The loop fills, and the needle becomes honest again. A label is written with pencil onto cloth tape and stuck beside it. A humorless reminder that speaks kindly nonetheless. The safety chain on a handwheel is loose where a screw stripped its threads. Years ago, I drive in a saved bolt and nut with washer from the treasure box the chain holds now. The wheel will not wander while the body leans for a wrench. From upstairs, a rumor travels that a corridor will host tea at 4. Small cups on a trolley and a jar of jam that has survived many shelves. I set the mixer to a generous but quiet line for that hour. Comfort arrives best when it pretends to be ordinary. A cart clatters down 2 steps too quickly and then corrects. The nipples on a radiator give a brief complaint. I touch the key to one vent and let the air sigh. Then water speaks. Then silence. The metal forgives the moment and settles. I turn to the ash pit and pull it clean with calm strokes. The drawer slides like a well-taught violin bow. Ash goes to the covered bin in small offerings, so dust stays where dust belongs. The door closes on a latch that finally learned its lesson after a strip of cork and a quiet word. The flanges along the sterilizer manifold get a patient inspection with a fingertip wrapped in cloth. No beads, no sweat. One union warm where it once ran hot, now even because of the felt satchel we fastened there in the night. I mark a tiny check beside its number in the ledger. A tame beast for now. Toward mid-afternoon, the hills gain a brief brightness that is not sun so much as a thinning of cloud. Somewhere a column may move. Somewhere a gap might open at a checkpoint. The hospital will not argue with weather or policy. It will keep its lamps low and its heat level. The plant will match it. I lay 3 modest feeds close across the door. damper a touch wider. The needle walks to the heart of the band and rests. The rune's chord deepens by one note and becomes easier to stand inside. Another bulletin arrives, the handwriting careful. Curfew unchanged now, convoy uncertain. Water trucks guarded by a short window only. I chalk the times beside the slate and draw a small leaf by the hours where we should save. A sign for the night that does not need many words. I fold 2 clean cloths and leave them where a new pair of hands will see them. Sharpen the pencil to a point that writes without scratching. Hang the wrench with the scar where its outline expects it. Order is a kind of warmth the body feels even when it cannot. Name it, a low song climbs the stairwell from the chapel and fades. The corridor breathes a patient warmth as people pass and stand and pass again. Tea returns in a few rinsed cups, and the smell of citrus from a peel saved in a pocket. I log the hour and feel the building lean toward evening without dread. Outside, the day begins to dim into the long winter gloom. Lamps that were shaded stay shaded. The radio in a far office is a moth wing against the concrete. The plant room listens and stays even. The ledger waits without urgency for its next quiet line. The coal holds enough shape to carry us until the hour when trucks might come, or might not. And either way, there will be valves to turn and small acts to place exactly where they belong. And the story of warmth will go on in its steady handwriting. Toward the dusk that waits just beyond the door, evening eases in with a long blue that finds the stairwells and stays. The plant room answers by widening its breath and lowering its voice. Lights under cages soften the pipe skins to a dull glow that looks like cloth. I chalk the dusk plan on the slate. Space heat set to a calm middle. Hot water lifted in a narrow window for the wards that bathe before lights out. Laundry held too. Racks without steam until the grid decides its hour. The lines read like a small road that anyone can walk. From the courtyard, a hand signal moves along the chain of doors. Water trucks may try the lower square at last light. I prepare the calorifier to greet them kindly. Mixer trimmed for steady warmth. Recirculation pump checked for couplings true and bolts snug. Flow will not stumble when the tank fills. The coal fines gathered all day become pressed cakes. A pail of water and a handful of flour from the kitchen. Ash for body. I knead the gray dough with a gloved palm and press it in a tin mold cut from a biscuit tin. Cakes set near the low return where heat is patient. Night will burn them slow and even. A bundle from stores carries a length of tin and some rivets saved from bed frames. I make a shield for the drafty corner behind the stoker gear. 2 soft taps with a hammer head wrapped in cloth. The shield sits like a quiet wing, and the flame stops fretting in crosswind. The gauge cock packings are due their kindness. Hemp teased from an old mop head and rubbed with soap. Each gland snugged by half turns that feel like the closing of a book. Glass wiped, marks bright. Meniscus giving its small nod on command. Curfew edges close across the city. Checkpoints breathe like sleeping beasts. Radios keep their voices under blankets. Here the plant holds its summer with the same care as a midwife holds a pulse. Nothing hurried. Nothing starved. I lay a chalk map on the bench for the new helper who will come when the roster thins. Risers marked in string colors stolen from laundry. Red for maternity, green for radiology, white for the long corridor to the chapel. A finger can follow warmth even when the mind is tired. At the return header, a light thrum warns of air caulk. Behind an elbow, I fit a brass capsule bleeder from a saved tray. One slow twist, a sigh, the line clears. The header goes from song to breath. Upstairs, a panel will stop tapping, and a shoulder will ease. Footsteps on the stair carry news. The trucks made the square for one brief window, tanks filled with patience and rope. I lift hot water for the hours set aside. Calorify climbs by degrees like a moon. Basins and kettles upstairs will greet hands with gentleness instead of surprise. While the head is high, I trade a little from space heat to domestic. Valves turn the width of a coin. The building does not mind. Linen will dry slower and baths will feel kind. Balance is a soft word here. It lives in small turns and even breath. A tray arrives with 3 busted tap washers and 2 still good. I punch new rings from leather off a ruined glove. Screws find their threads. Taps will stop. There, tears. A nurse will hear only running water and not a drip that argues with sleep. I check the small bypass we set for emergencies. A pair of salvage unions and a valve that knows its manners. Handle moves smooth, seat true. If a main line sulks, we will not go dark. I label it in pencil on cloth tape and tie the end like a ribbon, so a new hand will not miss it. Ash is drawn with slow pulls that do not wake dust. The bin lid closes like a library book. A breeze outside feels for the sill and finds the rolled blanket I wedged there. It changes its mind and leaves. The grate thanks us with a glow that is round rather than loud. From pediatrics, a paper star drifts in with the porter. It rode a cart from a window where small fingers made it. We tape it to the ledger cupboard. A mark that behaves like light without spending fuel. Macro news leans in and leaves again. A corridor free for aid tomorrow. Or not. Grid hours promised, or not. A convoy counted at a ridge and then turned. The plant room takes the rumor and turns it into chalk on a slate and coal and a ridge and a valve that moves only when it should. I warm the spanner in a pocket so metal will not bite bare skin. A stubborn union softens at the touch. Threads. Seat. No bead forms. The cloth comes away clean. The board gains a quiet tick beside its number. The stoker chain hums in a kinder key after 3 drops of oil placed where habit remembers. Roller, pin, little turning place that always asks last. The chew becomes a low purr that fits behind the pump tick like harmony. Dusk becomes night without changing speed. Lamps upstairs are shaded to soft coins. Corridor doors learn to close. Without voices, I feed the bed with 2 shallow blankets from the finds I pressed. They take fire like bread takes butter. Slow, complete, generous. A nurse steps in with a list for the hour when wounds are dressed. Keep the corridor mild, sinks even. No bright swings. I mirror the note with 2 valve turns and a line on the slate. The risers will carry that line as if it were. Handrail I test to low water cutoff and its bell. Finger to float, a single clear ring. Switch honest. I set it back and feel the room accept the check like a blanket shaken and laid straight. The kettle gives out a small cloud and asks to be shared. Enamel cups travel to the door and further up the stair. Steam finds wool and faces. It returns as quiet thanks and a promise to bring word if anything shifts. At the bench I trim a strip of cork and nestle it beneath a rattling hinge on the ash door. Silence arrives and stays. Small irritations spend more coal than anyone guesses. Comfort is an economy all its own. Along the hill, a far sound lifts and thins. Here it meets brick and lagging and a summer kept in numbers. The meter's needle rests in its white band as if it has always belonged there. Toward true night I bank the fire for the hours when thought wanders. A ridge drawn near, damper eased to a sip. Fines set like tiles across the front. Flame goes soft and round. The stack pulls like a well that remembers rain. I walk the loop without hurry. Felt jackets lie like coats on a sleeping row. Traps answer with soft syllables and then keep their counsel. Packings stay dry. Glass shows honest lines. The plant's posture is good. On the slate I write the next narrow window, when the hot water may lift again if needed. Beside it a leaf that means save if trucks do not come. The marks look simple. They are enough to steer a lone night. The city holds still under a sky that makes no promises. Radios murmur in other rooms. Someone on a landing hums the line of a song and then stops. In the basement a coal ridge waits. A kettle breathes. A ledger lies open to the next calm entry. I take the shovel in both hands and place 2 light feeds to the corners. Door closed before any flare thinks to rise. Blue. Seam held like a thread pulled straight. Pressure steady. Return kind. The wards above keeping their warmth as if it were a shared secret. And the work here continuing in the same slow grammar until the small hours turn and a paler shade begins to gather along the yard wall. True night settles and holds like deep. Water, the stairwells grow still. The plant room lowers its voice and keeps its slow summer under concrete for all who sleep above. I take the lamp with its taped lens and open the little panel that hides the indicator bulbs. One has gone to a dull ember. A spare from a drawer marked in pencil slips into the socket. A soft turn. A kinder glow returns to the dial, so a tired eye will not guess in the small hours. The fines I pressed at dusk have cured to a firm gray. I set 2 across the door in a shallow quilt. The flame accepts them without pride. Blue holds to a neat seam. The stack draws like a steady tide. Coal bought time from crumbs and ash and a spoon of flour from a kitchen that keeps faith. From the corridor comes the faint ring of metal at a sink. Night dressings close in quiet voices. I lift the wheel for the long run by the width of a coin and mirror the stroke on its twin. Warmth walks the handrails without showing off. Sleeves dry at their cuffs. Nobody thinks about the basement, and that is how it should be. At the feed tank, a hinge begins to click as if it wanted attention. A dot of soap on a finger, a patient press on the pen. The click vanishes into the cloth of the room. The float moves as if on a calm lake. Level holds between marks. I test the low alarm and its bell. A single clear note. Switch honest. Touch. Returned to rest. Then a glance for leaks along the rope gasket I braided at dusk. The seal sits true. Flame stays round instead of loud. Less coal for the same heat. The ledger will make it a short line and not a boast. Macro news is a whisper now. Blue helmets on the ridge. A window at the crossing that may open at dawn. Perhaps fuel, perhaps only rumor. I answer it by chalking 2 small leaves on the slate for save and spend. The night shift that follows me will know which way to lean without reading a paragraph. A spare strap from a suitcase becomes a clamp for the hose that feeds the sterilizer's cabinet. Leather under the screw makes a seat kinder than bare steel. The hose stops thinking about a bulge. The trap says one syllable and sleeps. In the treasure box, a handful of brass tags lives beside odd bolts. One tag becomes a label for the bypass valve we set last night, written in pencil on cloth tape, tied with string so a new hand will not hunt when hurry arrives. I pull the ash drawer with calm strokes. Gray lifts like sifted flour and slides into the covered bin. The lid closes like a book set down by a librarian with good manners. The door finds its cork wedge and chooses silence. The pump Paul asks for a finger of oil, roller, pin. Little turning place that waits until asked twice. The beat smooths to a hum that fits behind breath. The meter's needle rests in its white band and seems pleased to stay there. At the furthest radiator key, a bubble hides at the highest bend. I turn the square a quarter. Air exhale, water follow. Metal loosen its narrow music and go quiet. Upstairs, a cart will roll by without singing through a seam in the floor. Near 2, the hospital feels like a ship under low canvas. Steady and slow. I polish the sight glass rims with a cloth wet from the kettle. Marks shine. The meniscus nods when tapped. Injector ready but at peace. Pressure settled where the band begins and never argues. A nurse arrives with a tin of sugar and a grin saved for warm rooms. She sets a folded card that says keep the corridor, even at 4, when hands change and faces change. I draw a line on the slate and color it with a thumbprint of coal dust. The risers will keep that promise, whether anyone looks or not. The calorifier sleeps after its hour of kindness for the trucks. I let it dream on a low recirculation. Basins will not go cold. Space heat returns to its middle line like a river finding its old bed. Wind prowls the yard once and quits. The blanket, wedged along the sill, remembers its job. Felt jackets lie like coats along the risers, paste set, twined snug. The elbow that talked all week has learned a softer language. The floor above no longer taps back. I make 3 small billets from a pallet slat saved for nights like this. The starter box accepts them under a sheet of paper that once carried a requisition. Wood will be company for coal at 4, when thought drifts and a hand might reach before it plans. The ledger opens to a page that smells of steam and pencil. I set down pressure and feed and return. Stack draw after light brushing, fines burned to extend heat, bypass labeled, washers made from glove leather, remarks plain as bread, signature small and sure. The book is not for poetry. It is for trust toward. 3, a rumor moves along the stair that the grid may breathe before dawn. If it does, the generator will rest and the building will pull from lines that once were normal. I chalk a narrow window beside the slate to raise hot water without starving space heat. A balance that is more hand than numbers. I check the softeners. Tub, resin low by a finger. The porter's rainwater from yesterday keeps it polite. A cup of salt from a bag tied shut with hope is stirred into the brine. The float lifts and settles. Feed will carry fewer knives toward our pipes. The wrench with the scar nudges a union that dreamed of weeping. Dream dismissed. Rag clean. Outline. On the board, satisfied. A green tick chalk beside its number. By 4, the fines begin to give a sweet, even heat. Coal can wait its turn. I open the damper the width of a fingernail. Shift the pattern to a shallow blanket. Flame rounds and gives, without appetite. The stack thermometer slides a finger's width into comfort and holds. A line of hot bricks wrapped in towels returns from the nursery. They travel back to the low return bench to dry. Tomorrow they will go up again under wool caps and small hands. The circuit of warmth is made of bricks and towels and patience. No announcement needed, I cut a cork from a bottle neck to silence a latch that has learned mischief. The hinge accepts the cylinder like a small kindness. That corner of the room forgets to rattle. The heart sits easier for the price of a simple plug. Distant streets send back a thin clatter that might be a convoy or might be wind finding loose. 10. Here it is only a reminder to write the hour and not the hope. The meter's needle remains calm. The pump tick keeps time. The boiler breathes like a sleeping animal that trusts the hand on its flank. A final pass with the flue brush clears. A shy soot ledge. The draw brightens by a hair. I note it with a single word on the margin of the slate. Dawn. So the next shift will know why the stack reads sweet. I lay 2 short fans across the front from fresh coal. Door closed before any flare. Blue edge. Fine as thread, the bed settles. The grate thanks us with silence. Toward 5, the yard wall takes a shade that is not night. Gutters hold glass teeth that begin to weep. Upstairs a kettle clicks before it breathes. The plant widens its lungs. For handovers and early rounds, I tune the mixer for sinks where cold fingers will arrive first. A coin's width richer on the warm. The recirculation pump gets 2 bolts kissed tight so its hum stays round. The corridor to the ramp receives a lift that feels like good news without saying any. A folded bulletin arrives with a smudge from a glove. Grid may return for an hour near 6. Curfew unchanged, trucks uncertain by noon. I chalk the window big enough to see sleepy. Save fuel before and after. Share heat evenly in the middle. The map on the slate now reads like a calm path through a crowded room. The coal heap still covers the chalk by 2 fingers. A ridge is drawn near for whoever takes the shovel next. The handle's cloth binding is rewound where it loosened. Number. Hand will meet cord and be scolded. The tool that works all night should be gentle at dawn. I walk the loop once more with the taped lens half open. Packing's quiet, flanges dry. Traps courteous, risers even. The bypass tag still tied like a ribbon. Where tired hands can see it, the plant's posture is good. Shoulders low. Breath steady, then I stand a moment by the sight glass and let the room speak. Pump tick like a slow clock. Soft hiss where water returns to itself. A kettle murmuring for tea. The building above turning in its sleep toward morning. Macro news. Will right itself later. Ceasefire talks or not. A lane open for a convoy, or closed again. Down here, the story remains valves and cloth and fire and water. Small acts set in careful order so a hospital wakes into warmth that feels ordinary. I write the last line of my hour. Pressure kept, feed tempered by salvaged coil. Hot water window ready for grid. Fines burned well, coal holding. Remarks that the latch on the ash door now minds its manners. Signature small. The book closed without a sound. Too light feeds to the corners. Door closed, blue held. The plant room keeps its summer in the long blue before daylight. Footsteps begin above. A cup waits on the bench. The slate shows a path through the next hours. The heat goes on in quiet sentences, and the day begins to find its way upstairs by the rails of warm iron we have kept true. By first light, the stairwell carries a pale ribbon that is not yet sun. The plant room widens its lungs to meet the buildings. Waking, the cages cast honey ovals that soften wrench handles and valve wheels. I ease the recirculation valves for hot water, so basins greet hands with a kind temper. The calorifier rises by slow degrees. The mixer is tested with the back of the wrist and a patience learned in winter. A manometer on the return shows a shade less than yesterday. The coil I seated at dawn gives its small gift again. I note the figure in the ledger with a line that feels like a breath held and released. The feed tank lid lifts on a hinge that now moves without complaint. I set a circle of cork beneath the latch so it never rattles when the wind noses the door. Quiet added to quiet makes a deeper silence that people can rest inside. From the corridor, a porter brings a bundle of wool wrappers still warm from the nursery. They dry on the rail by the low return and take back the heat they carried up. The circuit of warmth turns like a wheel that prefers kindness to speed. I test the tiny check valve that protects the sterilizer coil from back breath. A fingertip on the disc, a listening ear along the pipe, a single pulse, and then obedience. The cabinet will hold its temper without stealing from space heat. Radiology has cleared their trays. I slide their wheel a fingernail colder so chemicals keep their calm. Upstairs shadows will form as they should without anyone thinking about steam and valves and gauge glass. A drip at the floor drain becomes a thin shine where dust would like to gather. I lift the grate and wipe the trap with a rag that already knows coal and paste. Water finds its course and the stones remember to be dry. Macro breath moves across the hills like a rumor. A lane may open at the checkpoint near noon. Blue helmets decide the shape of hours the way weather once did. In the basement, I draw 2 leaves on the slate for save and spend, so the night to come can walk by sign instead of worry. The belt that rides the small circulator gets a soft brush with wax from the stub of candle. The whisper that once frayed at the edge smooths into a round hum. Bearings receive a breath of oil from a can that smells like machine rooms and rope. I warm a strip of prime rubber over the kettle and press a gasket for a union that thinks about weeping when the header is high. Threads seat with a patient pull. The rag returns clean. The board gains a small chalk tick that means calm. A spare thermometer is proved in a basin and taped to a panel where new hands can trust it. Glass climbs and rests at the figure the card expects. Confidence travels more easily when numbers stand where they belong. The stack tells truth in ways a match can read. I shield the flame and feel its lean. Flue gate eased the width of a coin. Draw becomes silk. Soot will form slower, and coal will burn like a well-taught student rather than a showman. A felt jacket I tied last week has loosened its knot where paste met a damp corner. I rewrap with linen tape torn from a sheet and cinch the twine until the skin looks like a coat buttoned right. The pipe's tone drops half a note and stays there. In the treasure box, a handful of brass shims sits beside, tags and odd bolts. One shim slides under a pump foot that learned to wobble when the floor settled. The vibration that once hid inside the hum fades until it is only memory. The ash drawer moves on rails that prefer respect. I pull in slow strokes and feed the cupboard. bin, dust stays a story rather than a breath. The lid closes like a book in a kind library. The corridor past triage needs a gentle lift for transfers. I stroke the wheel by a hair and copy it on the twin, so both wings feel the same hand. Warmth walks the rails ahead of the gurney and waits there as if it had always lived in that place. Laundry sends word that racks will hold the day. No steam until the grid returns. I trim their coil to a sleep and the header relaxes. Space heat smiles at the gift and spreads it thinly across long halls and closed doors. A low alarm is tested with a finger under the float. Bell gives a single clear ring. Switch returns to rest. Assurance is folded back into the room like a blanket drawn to a shoulder. I write the hour in the ledger and leave space for the hand that follows. The penciled path on the slate reads like a quiet itinerary. Hot water windows for the grid if it breathes. A narrow save after. A modest spin before lights out. Macro voices remain cautious. Fuel rumored at the airport road. Trucks perhaps by dusk. The hospital trusts only what arrives in pipes and basins and radiators. My answer is a ridge drawn near on the coal, and finds quilt set for the small hours so the bed never asks in a loud voice. I press 2 fins of tin around the drafty joint behind the stoker gear. Rivets made from nails that once held a cot, hammered soft with a wooden mallet, so the echo stays gentle. Crosswind loses its appetite. Flame rounds and lowers its shoulders. The recirculation pump gets 2 bolts kissed home. Couplings checked for truth. A stethoscope made from a screwdriver, and a cheek hears only the kind murmur that means smooth. A strip of blanket becomes a hush for the handrail that clicks where stone meets steel on the service stair. The click that once learned the night now forgets itself. Upstairs a nurse will pass without thinking why the air is kinder. A cart rolls by with enamel that sings once and then falls quiet. I crack a tiny bleed at the elbow that holds the note. Air sighs, water replaces it. The floorboard above forgets to join in. The ward rests an ounce deeper. Because of a turn no bigger than the head of a pin, the calorifier returns to middle. After the morning lift, I set the mixer so taps greet hands with warm patience rather than surprise. The pump hums its low vowel. The needle rests in the white band as if it has always lived there. From the nursery, 2 bricks wrapped in towels. Come home to dry. They lean against the low return and drink back their heat. Later they will travel up again under wool caps. This is how a city learns to move warmth in circles when straight lines are broken. I check the little bypass we built from salvage. Valve turns smooth. Tag tied like a ribbon reads clear in pencil. Should a main sulk the path will be easy to find, even when eyes are tired. Outside, roofs hold a dull shine. A tram that slept all winter peeks from adrift and closes its eye. Checkpoints breathe. A convoy waits for a nod nobody will see. Down here the meter holds to its calm arc, and the book waits for the next honest entry. I feed the bed with 3. Light throws laid close and low. Door closed before ideas of flare can form. Leucine thin and steady. Stack thermometer 1 finger higher than last week's habit, and better for it. The softener's brine tastes right to the finger. Reason asks for no favor. The feed will pass quietly over hot surfaces and leave them smooth. The glass will stay clear. The valves will turn like good hinges on old doors. A spare pair of gloves is left on the bench for a helper with thin sleeves. Inside the cuff, I tuck a note that says which wheel to trust first if the room grows loud. Instruction written, like a lullaby rather than an order. Near breakfast, the building changes its step. Kettles rise. Cups clink in ways the pipes know by heart. I trim the corridor to the chapel for the small gathering that meets news with calm rather than brightness. Warmth set to comfort and not to drowse. The path there kept even and kind. A nurse brings down 3 washers chewed thin by taps that were braved through the night. I punch new rings from leather and fit them with screws that still remember their threads. Tomorrow the sinks will speak, in steady streams that quiet the pulse rather than peck at it. I sweep cold dust into the pan with strokes that do not wake it. A wet rag over the hand keeps the air honest. The floor shows the color of stone again. Order made visible, so the mind rests even when the body is busy. The slate gains one more small mark beside the noon window. A leaf for save if trucks turn back. A stem for spend if they arrive. The sign will guide the next pair of hands as surely as a lamp in a long corridor. The city will write its own page today. A gate opened or closed. A bridge watched or passed. Our page is valves and cloth and clean glass and a fire that knows its work. I step to the wheel and turn it the width of a coin. Warmth moves like a rail laid true under footsteps. The plant. Room keeps its summer for the wards above, and the hours keep assembling themselves into a road we can walk without rush. Late morning stretches into a quiet gray. Corridors carry the soft clink of spoons against enamel. The plant room keeps its low summer and opens its lungs a little wider to meet the hour. I lay a palm on the return header and feel the warmth moving with a round patience. The little gauge beside it reads kinder than yesterday. A line goes in the ledger that says only return easy, burden light. Note made for the afternoon crew. A ribbon of felt is laced around a valve bonnet that had learned to give up heat where no one asked. Linen tape cinched, twine snug. The pipe's voice drops half a note and the room grows easier by exactly that much. From triage, a folded card arrives with careful pencil. 2 transfers after midday. Keep the ramp mild in the sink. At a steady hand's breadth of warm, I stroke the wheel a hair, mirror the stroke on the twin. Warmth walks ahead like a friend who knows the road. Macro breath moves across the hills, a blue line at a checkpoint. A convoy in wait near the airport road. Promises shaped like weather. In the basement, the map on the slate grows 2 leaves for save and spend, so a tired pair of eyes can steer by signs rather than worry. I crack the little air vent on the highest elbow of the east run. A hiss like a whisper released from a folded letter. Warm water follows, and the tone settles to velvet. Upstairs, a cart will pass that spot and remain silent. The flue gate is eased the width of a coin. A light pass with the brush draws down. A curtain of fine ash. The stacked thermometer climbs a finger's height and rests. The flame turns round and gives more with less. A small meter on the softener tells its patience has been rewarded. Brine mixed at dawn has washed the resin clean. Feed flows like a polite guest. Scale will choose another house to haunt. Laundry sends a runner with wire racks that shine like new thought. No steam until the grid breathes. Towels will dry by the slow grammar of air. The header relaxes and space heat takes that sunlight and spreads it through long halls. I cut a gasket from leather that once cuffed a glove. A union that dreamed of weeping decides to forget. Threads seat, the rag returns to the pocket clean. The board gains a small chalk tick that means rest. A spare bulb slips into a dial whose eye had dimmed in the night. The glow returns to numbers that ask to be seen without squint. A tired hand later will not guess at a figure. The room likes this kind of mercy. The shovel handle gets a fresh winding of cloth. Palm and wood shake hands as equals. Coal comes forward in quiet ridges. Two light feeds laid close and low. Door closed before ideas of flair have time to stand. From pediatrics, a braided cord of paper stars arrives on a porter's hook. It hangs by the ledger cupboard and turns in the warm air like a small tide. A nurse writes that naps improved when the draft at the sill forgot itself. The felt under that hinge keeps its promise without asking to be praised. I open the blowdown into the jar, warm ribbon out, grit with it, seat home. Feed eased, so the line returns to the middle. The glass shows honest. A soft tap on the rim and the meniscus nods once. A spare strap cut from suitcase leather becomes a collar for a soft hose on the sterilizer rack. Clamp set, twine tied. The bulge that wanted attention loses interest. The trap speaks a single syllable and sleeps. The calorifier is trimmed to a middle lane. Basins greet hands without surprise. The recirculation pump hums its low valve. Two bolts are kissed tighter so the song stays round. Macro voices drift along the stair like moth. Wings. Curfew unaltered. Quid perhaps at dusk. The hospital trusts only what arrives in pipes and basins. I answer by chalking a small window for hot water when power lifts and drawing a leaf where we save on space heat before and after. The draft behind. The stoker gear is tamed by a shy tin wing riveted from bed frame metal. Nails tap soft with a wooden mallet. Crosswind forgets to meddle. The flame lowers its shoulders and goes on with its work. I make Fine's cakes from the day's siftings. A spoon of flour and a palm of ash. Gray dough pressed in a mold cut from a biscuit tin. Set near the low return to cure. Night will burn. Them slow and even like quiet bread. A strip of blanket quiets a handrail on the service stair that once clicked where stone meets steel. The click chooses sleep. Steps pass without leaving a note behind. Midday turns. The stairwell smells faintly of wool and soap. A kettle clucks. A tray rolls and rests. I lift the mixer for the ward that serves tea at a little table. Warmth set to comfort and not to drowse. Cups will find their steam without. Fogging the air, a tiny manometer loop on the far wall has forgotten to fill. Petcock cracked. The column rises with the calm of water, remembering gravity. A label in pencil on cloth tape says do not hurry and is obeyed. The belt on the small circulator takes wax along its edge and sounds like a string brought into tune. Bearings sip a drop of oil and tell the truth by going quiet. The pump paw fits behind breath like a second heartbeat. I sweep a path around the bunker with strokes that do not wake dust. Stone shows through the coal bloom. Order becomes another kind of heat. Minds rest easier when eyes do not stumble. A folded bulletin lands with a smudge of glove. Water trucks promised again for late light. If they come, we lift domestic and hold space steady. If they do not, we stretch with fines and a shallow blanket after midnight. The slate shows both roads and asks no one to guess in the dark. I test the low alarm with a touch. Bell clear. Switch honest. The lever returns to rest, and the room accepts the check, the way a body accepts a blanket drawn smooth. A small shim slides under a pump foot that learned to wobble in winter. Vibration fades until it is only memory. The home becomes a line of person. Could fall asleep inside at the furthest, cut off a wheel that once stuck now turns with the courtesy of a door in a quiet house. A strip of soap and a patient hand can make metal remember its manners. Afternoon arrives without brightness. Only a thinning of cold. I lay 3 modest feeds close across the door. Damper eased to a day breath. Blue seem fine and straight. The boom. Stack draws like a well that has seen rain. Radiology clears a tray and leaves a thank you shaped like neat handwriting. I lower their line by the width of a fingernail, so chemicals keep their calm. Shadows will bloom as they should, and no one will think about pipes. From surgery, a note and pencil asks for steady corridor heat during a changeover. I lift the long run by a coin's width and copy the stroke on its pair. Warmth walks the handrail and waits without drawing a single eye. The ledger gathers these lines without decoration. Pressure kept, return kind, softener polite, fines pressed. 10 wings seated, belts tuned, remarks spare and legible. Signature small and sure, macro horizon narrows. Rumors fold and refold at the ridge. The city listens to itself and decides nothing. Yet the hospital continues on the grammar it knows. Valves and glass and cloth and ash. Hands that move with a patience learned by winter. I bank a ridge near the lip for the long hour before dusk. The shovel leans where a sleepy reach will find it. Cloth binding tightened, so palm meets kindness. Coal will offer its weight without asking the wrist to argue. The kettle breathes a modest cloud that smells like leaves and iron. 2 enamel cups stand to be warmed. One stays on the bench for the next voice at the door. One climbs a few steps to a pair of cold hands, carrying. I folded card. On the slate, the path through evening grows clear. A window for hot water should the grid arrive. A leaf for save if it does not. Risers marked in string colors, so a new helper can follow warmth by touch. The plant room holds its summer steady, and the wards above will walk through it as through. A soft weather kept for them on purpose. Late afternoon settles into a deepening blue that gathers in the stairwells. The plant room answers with a wider breath and a softer voice. The cages cast warm ellipses on valve wheels and wrench handles. I lift hot water for a narrow window while corridor cups are washed and set to dry. The calorifier climbs by quiet. Degrees. The mixer is tested with the back of a wrist and trimmed until basins greet hands kindly. The pump hums a round valve that says enough and not more. A runner brings news on a folded card. Trucks have reached the lower square under a guarded hour. Sacks at the gate with rope burns on their throats. I mark the slate with a single leaf. For spend. Then the porter and I shoulder 2 bags at a time along the service path that remembers better days. Coal meets bunker wood with a soft thud. Dust lifts and settles. The heap rises above the chalk by a good hand's breadth. I rake a ridge to the lip and bind the shovel handle with a last turn of cloth, so the next hand will meet kindness before weight. Macro breath moves across the hills and thins. Checkpoints breathe. A curfew line draws itself a little tighter against the sky. The hospital keeps its own law of comfort and order. Valves and cloth and clean glass. Heat angled toward people who need it first. I reset the laundry coil to idle so space heat can spread through long halls. Racks will take the towels the slow way. The header calms. The return grows even and warm. The little gauge beside it carries a number that rests in the eye. Radiology has cleared their trays. I slide their wheel a fingernail colder. Chemicals keep their temper. Shadows will bloom in their baths without anyone thinking about the basement, and that is the right shape for the thought. A hose on the sterilizer shows a shy blister. A collar cut from suitcase leather settles under a clamp, twine tied. The trap speaks a single syllable and forgets the rest. The ledger receives a plain line that will make sense in any light. The finds I pressed at dusk sit cured like quiet bread. 2 go to the starter box for the hour when thought drifts. 2 live in a tin marked for night. Thrift laid out ahead of fatigue, so no one must choose between haste and skill. I open the blow-down jar the width of a coin. Warm ribbon out with grit, seat home. Feed eased so the line returns to the middle. The stacked thermometer climbs the fingers. Height after a soft pass with the brush and holes. The flame turns round and steady. The bypass valve we built from salvage wears its tag like a small medal. Cloth tape scrolled in pencil. String tied in a bow a tired eye can trust. Should a main sulk, path and answer will be right there in reach. A last pass of the room with the taped lens finds only ordinary truths. Packings dry, flanges content, traps courteous, risers even. The hush between sounds feels like a blanket tucked well along the edges. Footsteps on the stair carry a slow, sure gait. The night attendant steps in with a scarf still cold from the yard. We speak in the language of rooms that never sleep. The ledger opened between us. The slate mapped with leaves for save and spend. String colors tracing the risers like quiet rivers. I place a thumb on the meniscus and tap the rim. Water line true. Pressure settled at the mouth of the white band. We listened together to the pump tick and the small breath at the traps. A brief silence means we both hear the same health. He reads the hour for the chapel and the corridor, too. Maternity. He nods at the window marked for hot water if the grid breathes. His finger rests on the finds and the ridge I have drawn. He smiles the kind of smile a room understands. 2 enamel cups grow warm under the little cloud of the kettle. One stays on the bench by the pencil and the folded claws. One travels to his hands. The steam writes a small ribbon that means welcome and steady, and here are the tools in their proper outlines. We carry the last pair of sacks to the bunker and set them like books on a shelf. The heat settles into itself with a soft sigh. I wipe the chalk and draw a new line at the face. Tomorrow we'll see it and know where the day began. Macro rumor leans against the door and leaves again. Grid perhaps at dusk or not. Or convoy counting. Or turned. Our answer is the same measured grammar. A damper eased. A wheel turned the width of a coin. A gasket cut from glove leather. A felt jacket tied with linen tape. I banked the fire for the handover. A shallow blanket laid close and low, blue seam thin as thread. Damper eased to a gentle breath. The stack draws like a well that remembers rain. The grate glows round and patient for the next hour's needs. The wrench with the scar returns to its outline. The key sits in its place on the nail, the prom rubber left in a paper twist. The tin wing behind the stoker gear holds its little corner of calm. Order made visible so the mind can rest while the hands do their work. Upstairs the corridors dim to coins under shades. The chapel gathers a small hush. Cups rinse and dry without hurry. A door closes itself with manners learned in winter. The plant room keeps that weather steady under the floor with quiet lungs and an even heart. I leave a note tucked inside the glove a new helper will borrow. Trust the slate before memory. If the room grows loud, look first to the elbow that lights, to chatter and the bypass that wears a ribbon. Keep the kettle breathing and the glass clean. Let the fire be round rather than tall. We stand a moment without speech and listen. Pump tick like a clock heard from the next room. Soft hiss where water returns to itself. A small breath at the safety. The room's chord tuned to sleep and work at once. I sign the ledger with a small hand and close it without sound. The pencil lies parallel to the edge. The cups leave faint rings like moons. The slate shows a path clear enough to walk, by lamp or by memory. At the door the night attendant lifts a thumb in a sign that means I have it. I answer with 2 fingers to the brim of my cap. The latch finds its seat the way a good sentence finds its end. The taped lens makes a narrow stripe along the stair and then goes dark. The service hallway holds air that smells of wool and soap. A porter pushes a trolley and nods as if to a neighbor. The courtyard beyond is a dim plate of tin with a single thread of smoke laid across it. The city keeps its winter in long blue folds. I climb toward the wards that now carry their own warmth. Radiators tick like polite metronomes. Someone laughs once in a room where the window is bandaged and the cup is warm. The building wears its comfort the way a careful hand wears a glove. Behind me, the plant room keeps its summer as if cupped in both hands. Heat walking the rails to places where eyes are heavy and breath needs help staying even. The night will take the next hours in the same calm grammar. Valves and cloth and fire and water. Small acts laid in a steady line, and the story of warmth. Continuing past this page like a quiet road that knows the way home,